Hello everyone, my name is Rusty. For those of you who may remember, last year I submitted a story to this channel's Halloween special. It was about the night that my friends and I had a close call at the La Casa del Mustang. I have returned this year to share another chilling encounter. Ironically, this would also unfold on Halloween of last year, shortly after I submitted the previous story. This once again takes place in Puerto Rico, in the towns of San Sebastian and Larez. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, and I were your typical couple, inseparable and adventurous. We enjoyed casual dating, exploring the unknown, partying, and indulging in every horror film we could find during October. We will call her Aria for the sake of the story. We had been together for about 5 years at this point. Aria is an actual witch, not the cliched dark magic type with the pointed hats and sinister laugh, but a witch who practices her craft to bring good fortune to herself and to those she loves. She is also well versed in natural healing remedies, a very sweet and nurturing woman, the friendliest witch you could ever meet. Over the years, she taught me about her culture, including the intricacies of witchcraft, though she also has this uncanny sensitivity to negative energy. I often joke with her that she's a medium in training, but that's a tale for another time. Halloween is our favorite holiday. We consider ourselves to be true enthusiasts. Every year, we dive into the festivities, attending parties and binge-watching all the classics. Last year, however, we opted for a mini getaway, booking an Airbnb for a couple of days near San Sebastian. Considering that Halloween was on a Tuesday, there wasn't that much to do. On Halloween, Aria and I planned to enjoy the day and go explore the area together. As night fell, we headed back to our Airbnb to shower and to get ready for dinner. During the drive, we engaged in horror trivia and were ironically listening to Uncle Unit videos and other spooky channels. We passed a waterfall known as Salto di Calazo, a landmark that is known for its beauty. As we were crossing the bridge, I noticed 3 cars parked nearby, including a 1990s blue Chevy Lumina. I recognized it because my grandfather had driven the same exact model. We parked near the other cars, and I stepped out to relieve myself, while Aria stretched. Just as I finished up, I caught sight of a group of 5 figures near the waterfall. They were holding hands around what I assumed was a bonfire, their voices blending into a haunting melody of humming. 3 women, seemingly in their 30s, stood with an older man, perhaps in his 40s, and a young boy who looked no older than 18. Aria's expression shifted, her face turned pale. I could tell that she was frightened. The air grew thick and oppressive, almost vibrating from the tension. As if sensing us, one of the women locked eyes with me. Her expression twisted into something sinister, and the others soon followed suit, their gazes burning into us. It was as if the world had suddenly gone silent. The leader raised his arm, beckoning us to come over. The next thing I knew, Aria slapped me, her voice slicing through the air.
"Get in the damn car, we are leaving!"
I snapped out of my trance and rushed back into the car. Before we drove off, I risked one last glance. They all had a look of pure, unadulterated rage. We then heard a very disturbing shrieking sound as we sped away. Something sounded very pissed off. On the drive back to the Airbnb, we pieced together what had just occurred, both agreeing that we may have stumbled upon a black magic ritual. After settling in, we decided to grab a bite to eat in Larez. After dinner, we returned to the plaza, attempting to shake off the dreadful feeling from earlier. but it wasn't long before we spotted the same blue lumina circling the plaza like a shark stalking its prey. A wave of fear washed over me. They had followed us here. As the car continued circling us, both Arya and I grew increasingly uneasy. Frustrated, I decided to approach it, feeling emboldened by the crowd of locals that were present. But just as I was about to reach it, it sped off. We headed back to the Airbnb. The parking space for this house was across the street. So when we got there, we parked the car. As I was about to cross the street, Arya pulled me back as the blue lumina came rushing past, barely missing me. My heart pounded in my chest. If it wasn't for Arya, I would have seriously been injured. After shouting some curse words, we climbed back into my car. Arya burned sage, trying to ward off the lingering negative presence. Once that was completed, we finally returned to the Airbnb safely, and we ended up watching Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Fortunately, nothing happened for the rest of that night, but I wasn't able to get any sleep. I stayed awake, expecting the worst. The next morning, on our way back home, we drove past that waterfall again. Curiosity gnawed at me, and I stopped the car to investigate the area. As I stumbled upon the remnants of their ritual, dread overcame me. It was a sight that sent chills down my spine. A dead chicken lay next to the fire, and a bit further away, there was a lifeless body of a black cat, and near a creek, there was another dead chicken. After seeing this, we immediately left and never returned. On the way back home, Arya explained the dangers of adopting cats in October, especially black cats. Many are taken for the purposes of ritualistic sacrifice. Looking back, that group of people were likely trying to summon a powerful presence. We may have interrupted them, which is why they pursued us. To all of you listening, if you encounter a group of people in the woods or a remote area, it's best to steer clear. Most of the time, they'll probably leave you alone, but there's always a chance they'll try and drag you into a living nightmare. Big thanks to Uncle Unit for having me on his channel again, and I appreciate everyone for listening to my story. I wish all of you a very happy and safe Halloween. I live in a small town on the Delmarva Peninsula. I'm in a part of Virginia that most people mistake as Maryland. Because of the strange way the state lines run through this peninsula, the pandemic put a kibosh on a lot of Halloween-related celebrations, one of which was a local haunted house attraction that went on every single year. A close friend of mine is one of the main 3 people who begins developing a theme in June so they can have things ready by October 1st. This attraction is a month-long thing that usually draws in a pretty heavy crowd due to the fact that there isn't much to do in this town. And as far as trick-or-treating is concerned, most of the towns have an age limit where the cutoff is 13. This basically means every teenager in town that still chooses to celebrate has to find something to do that isn't going from door to door while dressed as Art the Clown in order to get free candy. This is where the haunted house comes into play. The majority of the clientele are middle to high school students. Keeping this in mind, it's definitely not on the level of McCamey Manor, and the scares are generally what you would consider to be a hard PG-13, but it's still a good time. So in August of last year, I was celebrating the birthday of my son's godfather. It was a small gathering, just the birthday boy himself, his brother, and me. We were at a local pub, and the 3 of us decided to sit at the bar and converse with a couple of bartenders as we ate and had a few drinks. It was the middle of the week, so it was generally a pretty quiet night. This is where I met the person that would join me on the night in question. She gave me permission to include her in the story and asked that I call her Dahlia. Dahlia was a unicorn in my town, meaning that she was and still is a ridiculously attractive goth girl. This is a heavily conservative area, not exactly the kind of place where you would find such a woman. She looked as if she walked off the set of a music video by the 69 Eyes. Think of Liz Vicious, with a bit more height and an awesome tattoo sleeve that starts at her left collarbone and ends at her wrist. The thing is, she approached me first. On a side note, I make tie-dye shirts as a side hustle, and I had made a admittedly pretty awesome ghost face killer tie-dye shirt. Even if you're not into this kind of thing, it would still grab your attention. This became the starting point of a conversation that lasted well into the night. Apparently, it was only her second night bartending at this new location. As we got to chatting, I found out that she moved here from upstate New York. She hinted at a relationship with a bad ending, and I know that experience all too well. She was trying to meet some new people in this area, and as expected, most were kind of put off by her appearance. But I'll tell you this much, she's got a heart of gold, and even though she could pass for the red-headed Lily Munster, she is a covert nerd. It got to the point where a little over a week after our conversation, I found myself making it a point to go over to that pub during my lunch breaks, picking up something to eat and just to say hello. I left out the part of wanting to marry her. I thought it might have been too soon to bring that up. The third time, she jokingly said,
Are you coming out here just to see little old me?
I half-jokingly responded, You know it. We had this quiet moment between the two of us before we started giggling like a couple of school children. This is where she grabbed a piece of paper from the receipt machine and wrote down her phone number. She handed it to me with a smile and told me that she got off at 6. I know there's this stupid cardinal rule where you don't call somebody immediately after getting their phone number, so instead I just texted her, asking if she wanted to go check out this haunted house attraction with me. I told her that my buddy Pete is one of the developers, and he's usually on site every night until it closes. If he knew we were there was a good chance he would let us hang out and talk to some of the haunt's actors. And there was an even better chance he would allow us to be involved a few nights during the month. I don't think 10 minutes passed before I got a response from her, and I could tell she was excited. She used 3 words I was hoping to see. It's a date. I felt like a schoolboy again, as a smile crept across my face. She asked if we should go in costume. I told her even though that wasn't necessary. Why the hell not? I mean, sure, it's only the second weekend in October, but life is too short, and Halloween is mutually our favorite time of the year. On the night we went to the haunt, I got dressed like David from the Lost Boys. Mullet wig, contact lenses, the works. She shows up dressed as Janine, the receptionist from the Ghostbusters animated series. Short red wig, blue tube dress, beaded necklace, and she turned the New York accent on full blast. One of the conversations where we were talking about nerdy stuff, she mentioned cosplay, and now I got to see the extent of her talent. We were walking around the haunt for a good 45 minutes, and as we were waiting in line, we took many pictures with other customers. We happened to be the only ones in costume, and they thought that we were part of the haunt. As we were walking around, we see this amazing Wendigo puppet, standing at about 8 feet, and you could tell a lot of work went into it. The puppeteer put a finger up and told us to wait. After the crowd dispersed, a hand reached up and pulled away a portion of the exposed intestines. It was my friend Pete. He had worked on this thing for 6 months and put a lot of detail into it. Immediately he picks up on who we're supposed to be, and to Dahlia's surprise, he didn't even have to second guess himself. We were conversing about all the different things he had tried this year to pull in a bigger crowd than before, especially post-COVID. And as we were having this conversation, this person in a green hoodie and gray skinny jeans pushes past us and grabs Dahlia's ass. I watched as she spun around in his direction and begins yelling at him.
What the hell do you think you're doing, you pervert?
He responds by saying something in a taunting fashion, but we couldn't make out his exact words because he's speaking in another language. Haitian Creole, if I had to guess. Whoever he was certainly looking for a fight because he then calls over another guy. And we see that this new character is wearing one of those dollar store half masks made to look like an old man. The green hoodie then makes a V with his index and middle finger, and then sticks his tongue between them while looking directly at Dahlia. I felt my blood begin to boil, but before I could do anything, Pete intervenes. I don't know what you're on or what you think you're going to be doing here, but you need to leave now. This is a family-friendly place, and we don't have room for troublemakers. Now get out before I call the cops. Green Hoodie turns to Pete and spits on him. Pete looks down at the loogie dripping down his chest. I could feel it. He was about to lose it on this absolute ass. The freak in the old man mask proceeds to start sniffing his fingers as the taunting escalates. Finally, Pete comes to his senses and made the much better decision to call for security. A hulking figure approaches, dressed as Leatherface, wielding a chainsaw minus the chain. What's going on here, guys? The figure asked from beneath his dead skin mask. This is when I realized it was Pete's brother, Bobby. Bobby is the definition of a gentle giant. He's a former high school linebacker and a current powerlifter. Bobby, get this asshole out of here and make sure everybody sees it. Bobby nods while standing behind the guy, and in one motion, he grabs this individual by the back of the hoodie, right between the shoulder blades, and gives the fabric a good twist. The guy tried to slip out of his hoodie and realized that wasn't going to happen. We watched Bobby walk him through the door, followed by his friend in the old man mask. Then we make our way through the door to see Bobby walking the two of them against the crowd, while shouting, "He knows what he did. We don't tolerate that crap in here." The crowd looked on and laughed hysterically, because they realized that this wasn't part of the show. As the laughing crescendoed, the green hoodie was getting angrier and angrier, yelling what I can only guess are profanities in his native tongue. The rest of the evening under that roof went on without incident. Dahlia and I had a blast being shown all the work Pete had put into making that Wendigo puppet, as well as meeting all the cast for that year. And yes, my assumption was correct. He even offered us a spot that was going to be opening up toward the end of the month. We gladly accepted, because that gave us enough time to adjust our work schedules accordingly so that we could keep our end of the bargain. By the time we left, almost everybody was gone, except for a few people. It was around 1 a.m., and we decided to call it a night. We were heading back to the parking lot, but when we got there, I received a shock that almost completely obliterated the rest of the night. Somebody had slashed my tires. Out of all the cars in the parking lot, mine was the one picked. As I was surveying the damage and trying to figure out how exactly we were going to get back home, Dahlia came to me and makes a face as if something is wrong. That's when I hear it. This almost rhythmic clicking noise. At first, I couldn't place what it was. It was like something metallic being clicked in and out of place. That's when Dahlia turns her attention toward the tree line. From out of the shadows stepped the green hoodie. In his left hand, he has a butterfly knife. A quick bit of information that may seem unrelated at first. Our local laundromat has a knife display case in the little shop attached to it. Despite the fact they're not necessarily the most legal knife in our state, they will sell one to pretty much anybody who has $12. Green Hoodie is now walking toward us, flipping the knife around like he's an extra in Big Trouble Little China, and is speaking to us in a low growl. "You make me embarrassed. No one do that," he says in broken English. Then he rushes us with a knife. I get the idea to throw open my car door. It hits him in the chest and knocks him on his ass, long enough for Dahlia to hop in the passenger side as I tell her to shut the door and lock it. Now, I'm the classic lover, not a fighter type, if I'm being honest. I probably couldn't fight my way out of a wet paper bag. But I did something that was completely out of character. When the green hoodie reached for his knife, I stomped on his hand and felt something crush under my foot. I'm certain I broke at least a couple of his fingers. He reaches for the knife with his left hand, and again, I try to stomp on him, but he's too quick. He grabs his knife and takes a swing, and I jump backwards just in time for the knife to only catch the edge of my pants. This thing was razor sharp, as it cuts a 2-inch slash into my pant leg. As all this commotion is going on, I hear Dahlia screaming, followed by the sound of a revving chainsaw. I look up and see Bobby in full Leatherface costume, running towards my vehicle with a chainsaw over his head. That's when the green hoodie stands up and freaks out, dropping his knife. His face turns pale as a sheet before he starts running out of the parking lot. Now, I would say that he disappeared into the night, but in his panic he wasn't paying any attention to where he was running, and he tripped over a curb and face planted on the sidewalk. We realized he wasn't moving. When this kid fell, it sounded like wet meat slapping pavement. Bobby, fearing the worst, made his way over and checked on him. He was still breathing, just knocked out cold. Bobby turns the kid over so he's now on his back. The kid eventually comes to and begins screaming in pain. Pete walks out of the building as he's locking up for the night and notices the scene unfolding in front of his very eyes. Dahlia opens my car door and screams,
He's got a knife! He took a swipe at JT and flattened his tires!
Bobby finally makes a call to our local police department. The cops soon show up, so does an ambulance. We watched them load the kid up into a gurney, and we saw that the police cuffed his hand to a rail. They checked his pockets and found that he was also concealing a box cutter. They also recovered the butterfly knife from the parking lot. It landed only a couple feet away from the sidewalk. We watched as the cops bagged and tagged the knife, and finally an officer comes over to speak to us. He tells us that we can get him on vandalism, attempted assault with a deadly weapon, concealment, and sexual assault for the ass-grabbing incident on Dahlia. After all was said and done, it was almost 2:30 in the morning. Pete, realizing I wasn't going anywhere due to the flat tires, asked Bobby to give us a ride home, which he thankfully had no problem doing. I expected this to be a one-and-done type of deal as far as Dahlia is concerned. In my mind, the date had gone tits up. So when she called me the next day to check up on me, I was pleasantly surprised, and she suggested that we have a do-over. We've been dating since that night, and guys, I honestly feel as if she's the one. We're planning on going to Massachusetts for that Ice 9 Kills 3-day horror convention they've been throwing there for the past few years. I'm really contemplating on taking the opportunity to propose to her there. Wish me luck on that front. As far as the kid goes, he was charged as a minor. Court documents revealed that he was only 15. His parents were very apologetic toward the 4 of us that day. His mother could barely speak English, and all she could say was that he fell in with a bad crowd. His lawyer tried to press charges against Bobby and Pete for the injury caused by falling on the pavement. He had broken 3 of his ribs. The judge scoffed at the idea and told the lawyer he was lucky that it didn't go any further because his client was the one who instigated this entire thing with the knife. For this kid's sake, I can only hope he has learned from this experience, because as it stands, he is going to end up in the obituary section of the paper sooner or later. Bad crowd or not, he's old enough to make his own decisions, and he chose to make a multitude of very stupid ones that ended up earning him a juvenile record by the end of that night. In the spirit of Halloween, a holiday I really don't celebrate, I wanted to share an experience that happened to me a long time ago. I was 5 or 6 when this happened. Some parts of the memory are hazy since this was so long ago. It was Halloween night. My mom, sister, and I went out trick-or-treating with my aunt and cousins. We drove to this terrifying-looking house. A lot of work went into the decorations, but it was off-putting to my 5-year-old self. My mother is a horror fanatic and was excited to go visit the house with my aunt and sister. I immediately started to cry as I didn't want to go near it, and I began freaking out. So one of my cousins, who was around 13 at this time, decided to take me back to the car and wait with me. So there we were, in the dead of Halloween night, sitting in the back seat of the car, waiting for our parents to finish taking pictures or whatever. I do remember this next part quite clearly. A tall figure was suddenly standing next to the car. It was a man, and he was wearing a mask. It was a pale, expressionless face with 2 black pits for eyes. Back then I had no idea who Michael Myers was, but I was introduced to the character in the most terrifying way. The figure raised a hand and began tapping the window. My cousin quickly pulled me to the floor of the car while trying not to panic. The figure stared at us through the windows while he tried opening all 4 of the car's doors. Luckily for us, they were locked. My cousin started crying, and I obviously followed suit and started bawling my eyes out as well. Eventually, the shape disappeared into the night, and within a few seconds of that, our moms returned with our other siblings. My cousin told them about the ordeal, and they were a bit concerned, but decided it was just probably some guy trying to be creepy on Halloween. Looking back, this was likely the case, but I've truly despised trick-or-treating ever since. And no, I'm not a fan of Michael Myers. It's that time of year again, and I know how I'm going to be spending Halloween. The same way I have for the past 2 years, slowly nursing a beer in the bar, watching the glass sweat on that smooth wooden counter, staring at it till it goes warm in my hand. I'm not there to get drunk. I'm there to escape. I never want to be alone at home over Halloween night, ever again. I promised the deputy that I wouldn't talk about that night. The town didn't need it. Hell, I even deleted the video. But now, with Halloween right around the corner, it all comes back. Well, small town law enforcement doesn't care too much about Reddit. I live in a small house at the end of the lane, another nondescript dwelling down a row of its sisters, prefabricated mostly, far enough off the beaten path to be cheap, but not so far as to be considered rural, but close. Pretty damn close. I didn't expect many kids to call around trick-or-treating come Halloween. It's a long road, and most children manage to fill their buckets long before they get to my place. Besides, I quite like the peace and quiet. Halloween used to be a good night to settle down and catch some classic horror films on TV. I kept a couple of bags of candy around just in case kids actually made it all the way down the lane. But mostly, it would be an evening all to myself. I can't quite remember what I was watching that night, probably because I had been enjoying an after-dinner beer and might have gotten a bit carried away, dozing off after one too many. My beer had gone warm on the side table, my hand still curled around the can. I winced as I unwrapped my fingers. Something had woken me up. The TV droned on in the background, the senseless drivel of late-night programming flickering across the room. Maybe it was just some high school kids out after some Halloween party, out on the streets, making some noise that woke me up. I checked the time. It was past midnight. I was glad I had invested in a bit of security for my house. Just the basics, really. A good camera to cover my front lawn, and motion-activated lights around the front and back. I was trying to make the tough decision of whether to clean up the mess right there and then, or just kick the can down the road until the next morning, when a loud rapping at the door shattered the silence. The can bounced off the floor, warm beer spilling across the bottom of my track pants. The shock left me too numb to even swear. I just set the can back upright, when the knocking sounded again. That a rhythmic rap, increasingly impatient, the tempo building as I stepped towards the door. I peered around the edge of the window. I saw nothing but my pale face in the glass. It was pitch dark outside. Why wasn't the light working? The knocking then stopped. It was a tree branch, perhaps, or something else tapping on the porch. The peephole glared at me, that tiny glass orb suddenly bulging with some half-promised horror on the other side. I swallowed, or tried to. My throat was dry. That warm beer on the floor was suddenly inviting. It's nothing, I said out loud, hoping the familiar echo of my own voice bouncing off the walls would ground me somehow. I walked up to the door and peered out, only seeing the orange cones cast by the halogen streetlights some distance away. I took in a deep breath, feeling my lungs expand, then let out the air slowly. Then, another knock came. I turned back around to face the door, my heart punching inside of my chest. I wasn't surprised to see my hand shaking as I reached for the knob. Our town was a safe one, far from the troubles of the big cities. We had little more to fear in the night than seeing our trash strewn across the yard by the nimble hands of raccoons. I threw the door open. The porch light winked on, suddenly blinding me. I blinked away the white spots from my vision. A pair of children stood on my porch. They must have been 9 or 10. I couldn't see much of them, because they were in the classic Halloween getup. A simple sheet draped over each of them, a pair of holes cut out for them to see through. Small baskets for candy broke the smooth lines of the sheets. The toes of brand new dress shoes peeked out from below. A boy and a girl, I thought.
Trick or treat.
I expected the words, but not the delivery. There were 2 figures right in front of me, yet their voices seemed to come from a great distance.
Trick or treat.
The pair spoke again. I felt a little discomforted by the distortion in their voices, more than the weird volume. They seemed to blend into one another, with some strange harmonics at play as well. It was almost as though there was a choir speaking to me. "A treat, I guess," I said. More than anything, I wanted these 2 away from my house. The whole situation felt wrong, the familiar veneer of the season concealing something deeper. Something rotten, like that small panic when biting into a piece of fruit and feeling that lack of resistance, your teeth sinking into soft mush. For a moment, I blamed the haze of alcohol and the dregs of sleep for clouding my judgment, but the adrenaline had swept those far away. My fear was true. I turned to the counter where I kept my keys and reached for the bag of candy I had prepared for this occasion. I was half hoping that the 2 figures would be gone by the time I returned to the door. Maybe they were somehow a figment of my imagination, perhaps the shadow of a dream brought on by some cheap horror films and cold pizza. No such luck. The pair hadn't moved an inch. They raised their baskets. There was already an assortment of candy there. They had a good run. "A bit late for you guys to be out, isn't it? Where are your parents?" The only answer I got was the impatient shaking of the baskets, the rasp of candy wrappers rustling against each other. I held out a handful of candy, ready to drop it in and call it a night. I expected to see a small pale hand clutching the handle of the basket. Instead, I saw what looked like a sheen of plastic. The basket was being held by what appeared to be a prosthetic hand of some kind, much like a store mannequin. I was more thoroughly creeped out by this effective little trick. I shrugged. Maybe the voices were recorded, a little touch of technology to bolster an otherwise traditional costume. I felt the fear melting away as I rationalized in my head. They were just a pair of some very clever children, possibly being helped by an adult. Smart, I thought. It certainly had me going for a while. "Stay safe," I told them, dropping the rest of the candy into the baskets. They didn't acknowledge me. They just stood still on the worn wooden boards of my porch. I shut the door on them. The window darkened as the light on the porch shut off. Odd. Maybe the motion detector stopped working. My instincts told me to stay there and wait. I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch as the two walked off. The light did not come back on. My relief grew as the odd strangers left my property. Still, something did not sit right with me. The light was functioning. It turned on when it detected me. The sensor was working and was state-of-the-art. It detected motions by sensing changes in temperature. Did those pristine white sheets somehow mask their body temperature? Or maybe what was beneath those sheets wasn't warm at all. The realization washed over me, like an ice cube running down my back. My breath came in short rasps. I had to see. I had to know. I could barely bring my hand to the curtains. It was shaking uncontrollably. As soon as I pinched the edge between my thumb and index, the curtain began to undulate wildly. I filled my lungs once more and peered out through the glass. They were still there, barely 20 yards away, just standing there, motionless, facing the street. I watched as they both swiveled their heads in perfect tandem to fix their eye holes on the window. There was no way in hell that they could have seen me come to the window. I had to put the back of my hand in my mouth and bite down hard to keep from calling out. But they knew. They knew I was there. I backed away from the window, dragging my feet over the carpeted floor. I barely noticed as my heel hit the side table, knocking over the beer can, and what remained leaked out onto my carpet, leaving a widening patch in front of me. I couldn't believe the raw, animal fear those two had conjured in me. Every instinct now told me to run. Run and go get help. Do anything but stay and be trapped in my own house. What could I really do, though? Call the police and tell them that I was scared of two little kids trick-or-treating? Or call up one of my friends past midnight and ask them to come over and babysit me, like a small frightened boy that just had a bad dream? The situation was ridiculous. There had to be some kind of rational explanation. But I couldn't just explain away the light, or the fluttery feeling in my stomach. I couldn't rationalize the prickly lump at the back of my throat. They had only said 3 words to me, and those unearthly tones. I shut the door to the kitchen, the sound echoing through the empty house. I turned my chair to face the front door, and then sat, waiting for the dawn to come. I must have fallen asleep sometime during that long, cold wait, not daring to move from my chair, paralyzed with fear that one of those shrouded children would appear at my window, or worse yet, behind me. But even that manic store of energy wore out as the night wound to a close. I was woken up by a polite knock on the front door. I quickly sat upright, nearly falling out of my chair. I stumbled to the door, a hint of dread from a few hours ago still lingering like a stale funk in the air. I checked the peephole again. This time, I was confronted with a well-scrubbed face of one of our town's deputies. We had been to school together. It was that kind of small town where you would know almost everybody your age if they had a history there. He was an earnest man, tough, but fair. "Good morning, officer." The sour look on his face told me that it was anything but that. His nose twitched as he took in the stale, sour smell of beer steaming off my floor in the morning sun.
"Had a good night last night?"
I thought back to the night before. No, not at all. The lawman was quick to see the fleeting shadow of doubt wash across my face.
"You care to explain why you stole the 2 mannequins from the store, dressed them up, and put them on your lawn?"
He shifted to the side, and I saw 2 familiar shapes on my lawn. My lungs wouldn't fill with air. They were still there. They had been there the whole time.
"You okay, buddy?"
The big man leaned in, blocking my view, and steadied my shoulder with one of his hands. I brushed his hand off and lurched out into the yard, disregarding the freezing dew on my bare feet. The pair stood there, draped in sheets. The 2 of them were holding hands. I brought my palm down on the one closest to me. It was hard, felt like plastic. I whipped the sheet off with one smooth motion. I gave a struggled cry as I stared into the empty green eyes of a child mannequin. I backed away quickly, ending up on my ass on the cold ground, clawing and scrambling backward, until I bumped into the legs of the deputy behind me. He had been quick to recognize my unease earlier, and he was just as quick to observe my genuine fear. He hoisted me back up to my feet and helped me back into my house.
"Mind telling me what that was all about?"
He dumped me on the office chair in front of my computer. I tried, but I couldn't force the words out. The deputy sighed and settled onto my couch, wrinkling his nose at the empty beer cans on the side table. He leaned forward.
"First call of the morning after Halloween, and I'm chasing down some bullshit break-in to a store in the middle of town. Now I got you hungover and scared shitless from a damned pair of dolls on your front yard. What I know is somebody got into a store, smashed up the glass, stole sheets and a couple of mannequins. Bloody kids again, except the glass."
The lines on his brow deepened as I watched his Adam's apple bob up and down.
"The glass was on the outside of the shop only. Damnedest thing. You got a camera in your yard, don't you?"
I nodded, numbly.
"What say you give me another 10 minutes of your time, tops? We go through that footage. I see you put those things on your lawn, then I'll be out of your life. Hopefully for good."
I turned to face my computer and brought up the stored videos on my hard drive. They were all automatically transferred, convenient for the time that I bought those cameras.
"Just put on double speed backwards. We'll see you set them there soon enough."
I hit the reverse play key and increased the speed. I saw the 2 of us scuttle from the house to the lawn and back again. Then, the first rays of sun retreating from the grass, pulling back over the pair of figures until they were in darkness again. The 2 of them stood there, motionless, for the longest time. That's when the 2 figures moved, all by themselves, in a jerky, swaying motion. Back from my lawn to my front door. The cursor danced at the corner of the screen as the shakes returned, stronger than before. The sharp hiss behind me told me that I wasn't alone in my discomfort. I shuddered as I watched myself on screen, so close to the 2 abominations, giving them a handful of candy each. I slowed the recording back to normal speed. On screen, I saw myself turn back into the house to retrieve the candy. The 2 figures stood there, then as one, They both fixed those dark eye holes in the sheets directly to the camera. There was something else unmistakable. There was a slight pulse in the sheets. It was like they were breathing.
I've seen enough.
I turned to look at the deputy. His face was as white as the sheets on the shrouded figures on the screen, his hand tight around the grip of his sidearm. That, of all things, scared me the most. A symbol of law and order, who had seen the worst of what our small community had to offer, just as scared as I was, ready to pull his gun in my house. I clicked the window shut and got up. I wandered over to my cabinet. I pulled out a couple of glasses and a bottle of the good stuff. The bottle gave a couple of glunks as I poured the rich golden whiskey into the cups. I set one down in front of the other man and took a sip of my glass. A lawman could lose his job drinking on duty. But the deputy didn't hesitate when he emptied half of his glass. He didn't look at me when he spoke.
Nana wasn't from around here. She was back from the old country across the sea. She hated Halloween. Said there were things out that night that weren't meant to see the light of day. She told me that for a single night, some things were set loose. The candy and costumes are a new thing, but in the past, on All Hallows Eve, good folks crossed themselves and prayed and stayed in. Whatever's on that recording, it's not what our town needs. You understand?
Dumb high school kids. The lie taking shape and form in my mouth. Dumb high school kids just fooling around. The lie fleshed out, taking on a veneer of credibility. That would be the explanation. No one had to know the dark truth of this story.
In your camera, it was having technical difficulties that night.
Never was a good piece of equipment. I regretted buying it the same week. He stuck his hand out, and we shook on it. And I have kept my word until now. There isn't a good reason why I broke my promise. I had never known true fear until that night, but I replayed it in my head over and over again. The recording is long gone, but of course, every detail of that night has been branded into my mind. I remember the fear, but I cannot think of a single action the two of them had done to threaten me. Eerie and unnatural, but without a drop of malice. It'll be Halloween again soon, and I know where I'm going to be that night. There are some things that roam the streets. The masks and costumes aren't always for the children. Sometimes they are there for the adults, for our own protection. After the deputy left, I watched the video forwards, just once. I remember seeing the two figures on my lawn, slowly inching their heads up, locking them under the sheets, waiting for the sun to rise. They shouldn't have been out that night, walking the earth. But sometimes, the things that should not be just want the simple things, like one last trick or treat.
Fuck this cowboy shit! You fucking ho dunk, po dunk, well then there, motherfuckers!